Welcome to Command Shift Left, the podcast that helps you navigate the treacherous waters of the software development, ops, and security world while also diving into the hot current trends in the industry. Join myself, developer Philip, our co-host Orvice.
Hey audience!
As we battle through hilarious real-world stories, pro tips and hacks for navigating your way around developer security, learning about our Shift Left life, and life stories that have saved our ass. We have an amazing pleasure of welcoming two guests on the show with us today, On and Nimrod. It's a pleasure of having you guys. And maybe let's get a short introduction from one of you. So in no particular order, On, do you want to start and kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name is On. I am a co-founder at Wilco. We're a startup dedicated to empowering developers to unlock their full potential. We do that by being sort of like the flight simulator, but for software instead of aviation. Previously, I spent most of my career in engineering management. I was VP of engineering at Handy and at WeWork during the rise and fall. Apart from that, married to an immunologist, 3 kids, love playing the drums, love doing home automation. That's it.
Awesome. Sounds amazing. Thanks for being with us. And Nimrod?
Yeah, I love On's introduction. I'm not sure I can surpass that way. My name is Nimrod, 32 years old, from Israel. I'm married and I have a daughter, 1-year-old, and a dog, 3 years old, that is very jealous of my 1-year-old. I'm a co-founder of the startup called Daily.dev, which is a professional network for developers where we serve hundreds of thousands of developers each day, helping them stay up to date, get new knowledge, perspective, and insights, generally helping them grow professionally. Previously, I co-founded an AI startup before AI was cool, doing emotion AI. And I'm a one-trick pony, mostly doing product and startups. I'm passionate about coffee, table tennis, and Japan, not necessarily in that order. So if any of these topics appeal to you, then love to talk about that.
So we need to take you to Japan, have coffee, and play table tennis. That sounds like
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I've actually done it several times.
Are you doing the Eastern grip on when you're playing table tennis, or just a regular grip?
No, I'm playing the Western grip. I was actually a professional table tennis player when I grew up as a boy and as a young adult.
Wow.
Yeah.
See, you already suppressed me both in terms of like starting with the fact that you're 32. I'm not gonna expose my age. And you were a professional table tennis player. That's so cool.
All right, awesome.
I'm really excited about having you two as guests because one of our goals with our podcast is to help developers improve and get more skills and make their careers and life better. And I think you two are already prominently working on that. I think both Wilco and Daily.dev are awesome ways to just make yourself a better developer. So I think that there's a killer combination here.
Oh, I didn't know there's a theme.
Well, once he called it shift left, kind of implying, but yeah, we'll talk about the shift left kind of phenomena perhaps later.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd be excited to jump on that topic as well. And I guess we can start off our first fact. And I believe that fact is yours. So why don't you give it to us?
Will do. So my fact for this episode is that many people believe that GraphQL is quickly going from hyped to hate. So for those who don't know, GraphQL was a technology developed at Facebook, used to connect to web servers and serve multiple elements of data with one query, a significant alternative to REST APIs. And initially and for several years, it has been perceived as one of the most exciting, best ways to build modern APIs. And many companies, including GitHub, have actively worked to add GraphQL on top of their existing REST APIs. But it seems that excitement is starting to sour. I have a quote here from someone I like to follow, David Kramer, the founder of Sentry, another very cool dev tool solution. And he says, still can't believe we all got tricked into using GraphQL. So that's the level of change that we're seeing from, oh, this is the thing you have to use, to, oh, I don't believe I ever touched this thing. While GraphQL by itself is interesting, I think there's also kind of a meta concept here that we're not necessarily aware of. There are a lot of trends that we start with conceptually that we think are going to be the future, and then they just sour and become nothing. A few other examples: Redux in React used to be the way to manage state there. Everyone said, oh, you just do Redux. That's the way you manage state. And now people do that. What, are you using Redux? Why are you insane? It's a piece of crap. Then you have to do these hooks or that or whatever. And another even more prominent example that took more years, Scrum, used to be you have to do Agile, and if you're doing Agile, you have to do Scrum, and you have to do stand-up meetings, and everyone were very religious about it. And now everyone's like, oh, Scrum is crap. Don't do that. It's a cult. Stay away from it. And and I find this very interesting. Like, usually when you talk about technology, there's kind of this expectation of the arrow of time. Like, if there's a technology that emerges and people like, it's supposed to kind of take over and just sprout new things and continue to be awesome. And you don't really hear us talking about the things that start awesome, and then we realize, oh, it's actually a poor idea. Why did we ever think it's a good idea? So I wonder if maybe we should also have more conversations on maybe this thing is not as good as we pretend it is.
I'm just wondering, now that you say this, and the hype cycle and how everything eventually turns from hype to hated, were go-to statements ever hyped?
Ooh.
Or did they just start hated? Is that like the thing that started hated from the get-go?
I think initially it was the only thing that existed. Like, when you're doing assembly and like you have just like jumps between points in code, and you didn't really have if conditions. So I guess it was just like, okay, this is what we have. This is the stone hammer that you're gonna be working with. This is the stone that you're gonna be using. That's it. So I think once an alternative showed up there, it immediately became hated.
But in a way, it's just semantics, right? Because based on the information that was available then, go-to statements were the bee's knees, right? All of a sudden, you had control flow. And now it's probably the most hated concept in software engineering. So I think it's inevitable that everything that we do will end up eventually hated, no matter how liked it is at the time. But I'm just wondering, it feels like in the past couple of decades, and now I'm really exposing my age, that I remember what happened before it. But I think Agile was probably like the first thing to enter this type of hype cycle, where the assumption was this is the right fit for everybody. So before that, you've had like, all right, this is cool. You want to try it in these situations. This is good for those types of situations. And then Agile came along, and don't get me wrong, I think Agile has a lot of good things going for it. But Agile came along and they said, no, throw away everything. Obviously, I'm simplifying. There were voices that said otherwise, etc. But the overall interpretation of Agile, even if the signatories had different thoughts, the reaction to it was, we should dump everything else and just work that way now.
Yeah.
This is what we do. And obviously something like that is going to get hated very quickly, because there's no way that there's a one size fits all for software engineering.
I don't know if it's quickly. Like, I think only now the tide is actually shifting. Like, there was always some level of opposition, but now it's kind of becoming the majority. And I'd say it took like over a decade. Also maybe showing my own age here as well.
We're very age sensitive here, I see.
Just because you said yours, up until that point, I was completely fine with mine.
Well, I'm gonna keep my imposture stuff for later on this episode, so I give the listeners a reason why to stick and retain more.
To stay young.
Yeah.
Wait until I do my young age.
That's a takeaway. If you're listening to this, Stay young.
I also think with it's kind of like maybe like communism, like specifically with Scrum. It's like people coming in and say, "Oh, we'd have to destroy everything that came before, and we have to move to this new thing." And maybe that's also that it's kind of a young thing. Like you have the fury of youth of, "Oh, I'm gonna change the world," and maybe you shouldn't change the world. Not every idea that comes in should be applied everywhere.
Yeah, I actually remember my first ever introduction into Scrum when I was still working at Cisco. And we had Scrum every single day. And it almost felt like I'm forced to give an update of something that I'm doing every single morning, when sometimes you're just still completely working on the same thing. And then suddenly Scrum became the thing where every morning you just keep giving the same update because you're working on a bigger task. So it somewhat almost became irrelevant at one point. But speaking in regards to things coming into market and then disappearing, there is a very good example with website builders where they come into market, people love them, they very quickly die, and then suddenly a new one is released, and then the hype is coming back again. And it's just a repeating cycle over and over. And then companies, I'm not going to name specific ones maybe, but they create a website, it dies, then they create a reiteration, call it something else, and suddenly it goes back. So there is also this kind of on and off cycle with certain products as well, which is interesting.
It's actually interesting to look at the bigger picture. So, we in software engineering are used to things falling in and out of fashion. Do other disciplines in engineering have the same thing? Like, are methodologies in mechanical engineering coming and going? What about electrical engineering?
Right.
I don't know. I mean, are we the only trendy, fashion-like engineers?
Electrons out, protons in. That's the way you do a current today.
I mean, there are some all-time hits. Think about classic stuff, like extremely old stuff, like a calculator. It's kind of like an all-time hit. Everybody's using it, and nobody's thinking about replacing it with anything else. Of course, there's like more advanced versions of calculator and like
Right.
and supercomputers
Right.
and stuff. But there are all-timers.
You want to go back to the abacus? That's the OG, like calculators. That
I don't know. I heard people are still using the wheel.
to do calculations.
Just in general, finding new uses for it all the time. It's crazy.
Yeah, I think the wheel is okay, but the new version, the squared wheel, that's the
that's
real
gonna
thing.
take. Yeah,
It takes some effort. You really enjoy the ride better as you have to push through it.
because that reduces your work in progress and makes you faster.
And I'm pretty sure that if you look deep enough, you're gonna find people who are passionate about square wheels. Like there's probably a subreddit somewhere that advocates for
And actually,
square
listening
wheels.
to this podcast, we just created several followers of the square wheel cult. Before we wrap this fact up, I just want to say that while a lot of these things are kind of losing favor, if you're using them, maybe it's still okay, including Scrum. And I'll say Agile, specifically, like there are other flavors like Kanban that I personally still like. But I think maybe we need to be a little more critical of the things we decide to follow and chant for without fully understanding what they are.
I agree.
I think this is a great point for us to wrap up this fact and move to the next one. And that fact belongs to On.
Oh, I'm in the limelight. Okay, so my fact for today is that there's this tiny USB dongle that you can hook up into your computer. And this could be any computer. This could even be like a Raspberry Pi. And it would run AI inference on it, which is pretty crazy. Like you're giving people the power to run AI way faster than the CPU, way cheaper than a GPU. You can just do whatever you want. You want to do some AI on images that you have lying around on your hard drive. You can do it. You can train a model. You can then identify faces or whatever you want on your images, and it's really cool. And there's it seems like there are two different dimensions in which AI is progressing. And sorry, I'm sure AI has been over discussed in this podcast already, but one dimension is the SaaS approach taken by companies like OpenAI and the others. And the other is, well, that's an honest response. I mean, there are a few others. Obviously, everyone knows Claude and all that, but it's OpenAI and the others. And the other approach is let's do it on, let's give people the power to do it on their hardware, and especially if you're a software engineer, I find the second one appealing, not necessarily as your production instance or anything like that, but just for you to tinker around with, to learn how to do these things. I think that's pretty cool. And I think that as a general point, any software engineer who doesn't pick up AI right now and understands what it is and what it can and can't do is doing a disservice to themselves in terms of their career progression.
And is that something, specifically I'm talking about the device, is that something that's available to everyone to obtain?
Yeah, you can buy it on Amazon. It's called the Coral TPU. So TPU is like a TensorFlow processing unit. And you can run TensorFlow Lite on it. And you can order it on Amazon. It's like, I think it's like $70, way cheaper than a GPU.
Surely that's some competition right there for any computer manufacturers, right? Especially now that more people will be using AI. Suddenly, there's something that you're saying is much cheaper and available. So I wonder how that will kind of change.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I mean, if you buy a Raspberry Pi and a Coral TPU for like approximately $200, you have a computer that's able to do AI inference.
I think, one of the most inspiring aspects of your fact and what you're sharing is like this general notion that AI redefines what's possible in many ways, right? So I'm going to talk about my very small and selfish problems, but, things like, I mentioned I have a dog and I have a very big problem with her barking at everyone passing on the street through the window. And, I took a couple classes with a dog trainer and I asked him like, hey, what should I do about it? He said, hey, you got to wait. And you want to try to spot a dog that's passing on the street, like before she noticed that, and then, give her a treat or something just to kind of like rewire her emotions towards something more positive. And, I like a very, like a very lazy person, like I ended up not doing it. So I kept having the same problem. But now, with AI, I'm kind of like playing around with the thought, perhaps I should install a camera next to my window and I don't know, put some Raspberry Pi and train it to kind of like spot the dog and automatically like trigger a treat with some sort of a dispenser or something like that.
It's actually completely doable these days. It's like, it really is so easy.
Yeah. I think it's clear where this is going. There's going to be a dongle that you stick into your dog and that automatically trains it with AI.
Yeah, that's for Elon Musk and the others.
It's actually funny because you're going to train the model to recognize dogs, so you can train your dog
to recognize models.
To recognize exactly. So the dog is sort of another form of not human intelligence. It's not artificial, but it's not human, and the intelligence is least likely lower than human one. But what you're doing is exactly like training a model, which is really cool. But I'm really interested in like, what does it mean for software engineers? Because the predictions I'm seeing are all over the place. Like, some are saying software engineers are going to be replaced by AI. We thought that it's going to start with blue collar. It's actually going to start with white collar jobs. And then the complete opposite is software engineers are going to be needed more than ever. AI is just the beginning. Where do you stand on all of this?
I, for one, welcome our new overlords. OpenAI, Skynet, please don't kill me. I'm on your side. But with jokes aside, I think it's probably not going to be this plain cut with either taking over and destroying everything or
making everything awesome, it's probably going to be kind of like the other revolutions we've experienced, like the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution, where some jobs disappear, some jobs get created, some jobs, and I'd say even most jobs, get altered dramatically. So for engineers, specifically software engineers, I think it's going to be altered dramatically. And I think we're already kind of seeing it. I don't think we have a single employee at Permanent.io that doesn't combine some kind of AI, Copilot or ChatGPT, as part of their daily flow of writing code. But they're still writing code. They're still criticizing it. It's still reviewing it. Still writing some of that on their own. And so I think if we'd go back to like the 70s and we'd bring in someone like directly out of there that hasn't lived through the period of time, and just put them into our office and told them to like do code review or do extreme programming with some of the other engineers, they'll be like, they will be completely boggled and say, are these engineers why are they not doing punch cards, and why aren't they like memorizing?
Wait, you guys don't do punch cards?
Since when did we stop doing punch cards?
Punch cards are the best. If you're not doing punch cards, you're missing out. Go back to the OG.
It's still in the hype cycle, as far as I know.
By the way, the best way to work with punch cards is once you have them on a chain to connect them to a wheel. The wheel, that's
and then connect the wheel to a Raspberry Pi, and all right.
Oh, there we go.
And have a dog just run it for you, being trained by. It's all one thing.
Dog-driven development. What's interesting to me, though, is, when I see the same thing, right? Everyone at Wilco is also using ChatGPT or Copilot or something like that to aid them. What I'm thinking is I'm seeing a process where people are writing less and less code, but are still having to do everything else that a software engineer does, like all the other skills, architecture, system thinking, debugging, communication skills, design, all of that. That's still being done. And I think it's going to continue to be done for a long time. But when you take coding away, I think that you kind of open the access to software engineering. I think so many people are afraid of software engineering. It's like, oh, all these people with their dark mode IDEs, that's not the person I want to be. But now if you're saying, and granted, we're a few years away from that, but if you're saying software engineers actually don't have to mess around with code as much as they used to, then maybe people who would go to electrical engineering or mechanical engineering or all of these disciplines would say, you know what, I can be a software engineer. I can pick up the other skills. They're actually not that different. I have to think in terms of systems and how they fail and how they work. I have to communicate with my colleagues. Maybe I can be a software engineer, and maybe will be kind of like the spreadsheet. AI would be kind of like the spreadsheet to accountants, and it would open up more people to the profession.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, another way to look at it is that, AI is not going to necessarily replace developers, but it may very well challenge developers who are not going to use AI, or even replace developers who are not using AI, because you're just having this like multiplier on everything that you do, especially in terms of like mundane tasks, even like writing commit messages, writing tests, all sort of stuff that, developers hate, are going to become much easier.
Yeah, that's true. And I still find it quite fascinating that we all kind of adapted to using some sort of AI very, very quickly. It's literally the matter of months, and suddenly, like Kor said, everyone at Permit, for example, is already using some sort of AI to aid their workflow. And I think now what we do experience, I mean, Nimrod, like you said, things in the command line, developers hate it. I just recently stumbled across a new terminal that's being developed by some company which uses AI to kind of write these commands for you and predict to know what you're going to do next. So it does it for you as well. So we can see all these companies like implementing this little like spark of AI into everything that you do, especially the mundane tasks that are part of any engineer's kind of life and things that they have to do. And suddenly now we're at the stage where, it will probably be hard to find someone who, first of all, didn't hear of using a tool and probably didn't use a tool themselves.
Something I think will definitely require more human attention as AI takes over in software or becomes more prominent in software is understanding and debugging. when I was just starting as an engineer, I worked with a friend of mine, now one of the founders of Solo.io, and he used to say, "Oh, the best way to be an engineer is work with no bug-oriented programming. So as you write your code, if you see you're gonna be putting in a bug, just don't. It saves a lot of time later. It's a lot of energy. You don't have to go back debugging. You don't have to write tests. It's amazing."
It's kind of like stay young. It's the same type of advice.
Don't use GraphQL, stay young. Yeah.
And so with AI, you have less of that choice on how the code gets written, with bug-oriented programming or not. So it will essentially require more engineers to do debugging on other people's code, basically the AI's code, and there will be more effort on understanding that code. And ironically, on the other end, there's another trend of everything is code. So we have infrastructure as code, policy as code. In general, we got to the agreement as humanity, at least for now, that the best way that we have to describe something that is complex is as code. So we'll be having more things as code, maybe generated by AI systems, and now we need to find a way to actually understand what the hell is written there.
I already know an infrastructure as no-code company.
You're right.
Which is like the two trends coming together.
Right, but I'm guessing they are generating code on the other end. So
yeah, of course.
And they're doing that on Web3, right?
Yeah.
So
with a GraphQL and I don't.
Yes. And the dog running in the background,
being managed and trained by.
So I guess to the engineers out there, stay young, don't write bugs.
Don't use GraphQL.
Maybe a practical piece of advice. Think about how AI is going to change your life, and what are you going to do about it? Like how are you going to embrace it?
And buy a dog.
And
buy a dog in a square wheel.
Unless you're allergic to the wheel.
Awesome. And I think this is a perfect segue for us to move to the third fact. And I believe that one belongs to you, Philip.
It is. All right. So my fact for today's podcast episode is that there is a new piece of technology called Li-Fi, which is essentially a piece of technology that uses light for data transmission. Now, Li-Fi, which stands for light fidelity, is essentially a new cutting-edge technology that's coming in that we can maybe start to see being utilized in some places, which essentially uses waves, such as the ones that you get maybe from LED bulbs or other kind of light sources to transmit data, which when you hear about it sounds like, well, how is that even possible? But actually, it's a piece of technology that kind of offers a lot of different advantages over, for example, your traditional Wi-Fi signal. So now, for example, we'll be able to get higher speeds. Supposedly, that's what's going to happen. We might get improved security because, for example, light cannot penetrate through walls. Wi-Fi cannot penetrate through walls, whereas Li-Fi, has the ability to do that. And the other kind of issue here, or kind of side fact for this Li-Fi case, is that usually traditional Wi-Fi signals, they also struggle to penetrate through water. However, the light-based communication, like the Li-Fi, could kind of revolutionize underwater data transmission. And there is actually a lot of cases where we currently struggle with that. So it could be things like, for research purposes or for potential like diver communication. And there is just so many different use cases for that. But in general, we could be seeing this type of technology come in, and we could be seeing faster Wi-Fi than we have currently even. So it's very interesting.
So to clarify here, so we're talking not about optical fibers where you have basically a cable where you beam light across the cable. You're talking about like open air light source being read from afar. Okay, interesting. I will say that this is not new, right? This is again, this is equivalent to going back to the wheel or something, because we had like light beacons. And that was the fastest way to like communicate in the past. You had like, for example, you can see it in The Lord of the Rings, and you can see it in a lot of other historical pics. You have like beacons across the the wall, and when the enemy comes, you light up one beacon, then the next beacon sees you light it up, and then they light theirs, and then you...
They used to even do it with fires.
Yeah, exactly.
Before they had beacons, they would just light a fire
beacon,
to signal.
usually,
but it was just one bit.
Yeah, usually the beacon was just a fire that you turn, that you ignite, and is used as a signal. And that was something quite ancient, I'd say.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because one of the use cases for this was that you could now have some kind of smart city application of this, where every light street or kind of other public lighting could now become data transmission points, like enhancing just the general connectivity in any kind of urban area. So
now I'll have...
That's a use case.
Now I'm going to have a street light next to my apartment, and it's going to start blinking because someone is sending an SMS.
But possibly.
I wonder if, back in the day when they had fires as beacons, and then new technology came in, and then someone probably posted a blog with like fire-based beacons considered harmful. And that's how it exited the hype cycle.
Yeah, you know how many people get burned in a fire? 100% of people that got burned by a fire. That's the...
But it reminds me like this type of notion, that going back several years before Silicon Valley show was released, every founder used to say that their company is making the world a better place.
Yeah.
This kind of stuff. So when thinking about, and now like everybody tries to avoid it. Like nobody's going to say that their company is making the world a better place, because this kind of like it even became to some extent a taboo. But in this case, the only thing that gets to my mind is that if I have faster Wi-Fi, it means I have faster internet, and slow internet gets the worst out of me. So for sure, faster internet can make the world a better place.
Yeah, but seriously though, I think that any type of connectivity that doesn't require expensive infrastructure is very welcome, because there's so many places in the world where laying out fiber or cable is just a monumentous task that is not going to be done anytime soon. So if you have something that can just use the air as its
medium,
whatever, conductive medium. Yes, thank you. Then that's pretty cool, and you can start using it in so many places that just didn't have access. So I do think it's awesome, and it is making the world a better place with all my cynicism.
For sure. Like, I mean, right now, for example, I'm doing some renovations to my flat, and one of the things I'm thinking about is running Ethernet cables underneath the floorboards, just to make sure that I can have access points in several rooms, so that the internet is fairly fast. Now, in that case, and people do this at a large scale, right? They have big houses and then they drive Ethernet everywhere, and it's just a whole complicated solution that they need to think of that's going to be permanent and long lasting. But in this case, you wouldn't have to do that, right? Just plug in your bulb at the top, and suddenly...
And you can also, by the way, put GPUs under your floor, and then you'll have like underfloor heating built in.
and get Bitcoin on the way, just as a byproduct.
You mine in the winter, and then it heats your place, and then, I don't know, you figure out something in the summer.
And then you use those Bitcoins to pay for air conditioning in the summer. It's a self-sustaining...
We might be onto something here.
Probably not. Just inefficiencies in transmuting the energy is just probably going to be very wasteful.
But I do know of a company, and this, with full disclaimer, I'm also an investor in that company, but there is a company that's doing light-based charging of devices. So you can put something on your ceiling, and then you can charge devices in the room, as long as they're a line of sight between the two, which is really cool, because you can use it, for IoT devices that you have, around you, or you could have like, a table or a desk with a regular charger, but that charger is connected, instead of being connected to an outlet, it's through light is connected to the ceiling, not connected, like faux connected to the ceiling. So you can put it in the middle of the room without having to worry about, needing any power outlets near it.
So potentially we could have charged devices permanently.
Yeah.
With that solution. Interesting.
Yeah, you can have your smoke detector, for example, just constantly on, never needing to replace the battery.
Right.
But then it won't beep, which is my favorite thing to have it
True.
do.
and you won't be able to use a broom to beat the beep out of it.
Yeah, that's my favorite
Takes away all the
pastime.
fun.
It's also interesting to kind of think about the combination or the way that these two often meet, both communication and driving energy. You see it also like on wires. So like when we connect USBs, those used to both power devices and upload data or share data from devices. So I wonder if we'll also have a kind of maybe call it a hotspot that both provides internet and power to devices across the space. And I'm starting to feel like we're going back to Tesla's vision. So Tesla had supposedly the idea of driving electricity through the air and power everything without wires. And he presumably had a way to actually make it work. But he was kind of rejected by society because of there's the whole kind of argument with Edison there. And maybe we could have already had all of these solutions. Well, I think both powerful lasers and electricity running through the air are somewhat troubling. I don't know, but
For those in the audience who heeded the advice to stay young, Tesla was an actual person before a company. So the important context to what Or just said.
oh, now the young people are going to think that you were alive during Tesla's time.
Yeah, I remember we used to grab beers together.
He was a very cool guy until he went insane.
We'll purposely not show any videos of you now so people can just guess. All right, and I think this is the perfect moment to move on to our final fact. And the final fact is given to us by Nimrod. So let us know what it is.
All right, awesome. So actually, one of my original fact was discussed early on in the episode. So I want to keep things interesting. So I'm going to improvise with an alternative fact. So my original fact was that many people believe that your code doesn't matter that much anymore. If you think about your future and how to be great, and we discussed about other skills that are still relevant and are going to become even more important as we go deeper into the future, like communication skills, like architecture, like problem solving, debugging, etc. So my fact for today, the new fact, is that many people believe that hybrid work, meaning like work that combines both work from home and work from office, is the worst of all worlds. So when you think about it, that, 3 years back, almost 4 years back, when COVID just started, there were many companies, literally like almost any company that was forced to go fully remote all of a sudden. And almost all of these companies were not prepared for that moment, both in terms of their infrastructure, tooling, work processes, culture, and whatnot. And to some extent, employees and people generally like fell in love with the concept that they can also work from home because it gives them a lot of flexibility and a lot of freedom to prioritize other stuff in their lives that they care about. And then at some point, companies wanted to return back to the office. And then we got this kind of hybrid model where some companies are really opinionated and saying either you go full back to the office or you quit or we fire you, whatever. And some companies are adopting this like middle ground where you work a little bit from your home or a little bit from the office. And there's an opinion that not many people are well suited to work and be productive both from their office and from their home, which ends up being the worst of all worlds.
I think the move to hybrid and the and remote work and the fight against it is a perfect example of the toothpaste not going back into the tube. Like I can understand why these bigger companies are struggling to kind of reorg themselves to be able to do remote work and to get the value out of it, but there's no going back. And you see a lot of companies constantly also flipping back and forth on it because they went remote, obviously, and then we can't actually do it, and then actually we can do it, and we let some of you do it, and because there's so much pushback. I also think it's a requirement. Like modern times are insane. Like, it's up, the pace of life is constantly speeding up, and it has come to a point where I think without balancing acts that allow you more flexibility, it will be basically impossible. And I think maybe even more importantly, like as part of my philosophy as an employer, is what I care about with my employees is that they grow as people and that they deliver value. And why should I care where and how they do it, as long as they do it and it works well? It's my responsibility as a manager, as an employer, to get them to work well together. And maybe it would make more sense to leverage the best existing ways today and give them flexibility, as opposed to try to force them into some weird template that someone created back in the industrial age. In general, by the way, this is one of my pet peeves for something that I really hate. There's so many things that we're still doing as humans that are completely obsolete. So like our entire school system, for example, it was basically incepted back in ancient Greece. It was updated once in the industrial age, as we had as we started to train people to move into cities and work in factories. So we had to make sure that they learn how to read and write, and we had to make sure that they can follow instructions and also work according to a time schedule. So there's a bell or that tells you when you go on your shift, when you go off. And who works like that anymore? And that's like a factory. Of course, there are still factory workers, but that's not the major percentage of our population today. But still, we train people to work in factories because that's how we've been doing it. It's really, really weird.
To me, that it kind of goes back to Orr's fact and the fact that nothing is like a one-size-fits-all solution. So hybrid was kind of marketed as the panacea for everything having to do with work. But hybrid obviously has its shortcomings. And we work hybrid, by the way, and I love it. But there are shortcomings, because if you're always in the office, then you can always tap someone on the shoulder, which is not always a good thing, but in many cases it is a good thing, and you can have a conversation and
hashtag me too.
But you can hash things out very quickly when everyone's in the office. When you're fully remote, people figure out ways to do that. When you're hybrid, people will wait for the next time they're next to each other. In many cases, you've introduced a bottleneck.
That's very true. And there's also like another nuance to it, which is like there's 50 shades of hybrid, right? There's hybrid where everyone is from a particular
I don't
country.
know how you guys work. We keep it clean.
I'm interested now.
Yeah, I mean, there's hybrid where everyone, let's say, is from New York, and we're working 2 days a week at home and 3 days from the office, and it's the same office. And there's hybrid where like there's some people in New York and there's some people in London, for instance. And the people in New York, they work 5 days a week from the office, and the people in London, they work from home. Like there's all sorts of different combinations, and I think that, you know, tapping into the bottleneck thing that On has just mentioned, there's also the communication style where you're in office, it's more like biased towards synchronous communication, and the more you go towards remote setting, you tend to bias more async communication because that's just more efficient. And then once you have this hybrid model where some people are all from home, some people are all from office, for instance, then you have two different types of communications, and mastering one type of communication is very, very hard, let alone mastering two.
In the end of the day, this kind of sounds like, you know, like a system architecturing problem that you get in a job interview. You have several servers, some of them are deployed on this region, some on that region. They need to communicate. Some of it needs to be asynchronous, some of it needs to be synchronous. How do you produce the most efficient system?
I actually have the opinion that the corollary to Conway's law is that software architecture works on humans and teams. Because for those of you who don't know, Conway's law states that the org will basically ship itself. The system is going to look like the communication and structure within the organization. And what it means, though, is that if you think of the architecture of the resulting system, you can apply that architecture to the teams and the humans, and get the result that you want, right? So software architecture patterns work on teams.
That's kind of like a variant of owners end up looking like their dogs and vice versa.
Oh boy.
Depends on how they train their dogs and whether they use AI to do that or not.
Yeah, maybe we should also start using AIs to tell us how we need to shape our organizations. Honestly, I'm sure someone's already doing that. But it's very interesting to think. Also, what does that mean for the what we put from ourselves into the software that we're building? Like, if we change as people, does our system architect change? Like, if I go on Vipassana now and I'm more connected to the spiritual world, will I be using more microservices or less?
You'll default to less communication, I think, between systems, right?
I don't know.
I don't know. I've never done that. I can't keep my mouth shut for more than 10 minutes.
I think with Vipassana, the idea is that you're silent for a period of time and the rest of the time you're communicative. I actually wanted to go on Vipassana, and I already signed up, and then COVID hit, and then I forgot about it.
But then you would just naturally isolate it and didn't have to speak to anyone anyway.
Yeah, it didn't quite feel the same thing. I don't know. Good friend of mine who's a software engineer. He has an interesting combination of things. So being a software engineer, crashing spaceships on the moon, and being a Vipassana guide. So maybe these things are correlated. Maybe by crashing things on the moon, you want to spend more time reflecting on what you do in your life.
I also have a friend who crashed a spaceship on the moon.
Maybe it's the same one.
Maybe.
I kind of wanna touch on the way employees think of what's best for them, and how, like, as maybe an employee, you decide what type of environment you want your workers to work at. Now, this is a very individual thing, I think, and I don't think you can ever get this right, nor you can ever appeal to everyone or each particular person. I mean, for example, I've most of my career have been a remote worker. I only worked when I was in the US. That's when I attended office, but from that time onwards, it was always remote work. Now, if you ask me what would I prefer, I'd instantly tell you that at this moment, I'd probably want to come into office every single day. If you have someone who comes into office every single day, they'll probably kind of dive towards I'd probably like to work from home for most of the week. So I think everyone will tell you something completely different based on their situation. And I don't think there is getting it right. But I think giving the flexibility to your employees to kind of decide is probably a nice thing. But then again, every individual person has to know what they're good at. And I think, a lot of people, when they started remote work, they kind of failed at doing it because it's very hard to kind of get your schedule in place. On the other hand, the opposite can be said for people going into office. So, I just kind of wanted to wrap up on that. That it's not always as easy as it might think, and it's a very individual thing.
The grass is always greener on the other side, essentially.
Yes, exactly.
And especially when you use GraphQL.
Especially when you're a dog that is running around with a dongle of AI trying to train you. Oh, I wish I was that dongle.
To be fair, when you're working at home remotely, it's probably a good idea to have a dog.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And a dongle. And a wheel.
And a wheel, yeah. And stay young.
The important lesson for today's episode.
Thank you guys for being on the show. On Nimrod, it was a pleasure speaking to you. And
thank you.
And we'll see you guys, everyone listening to the podcast, in the next episode.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye. I think this is the perfect time to wrap up the show. If you liked this podcast, tell your friends about it. If you didn't like it, tell your enemies about it. Hey, it's Philip. There is a few little things I quickly want to add. If you enjoy Command-Shift-Left, make sure you leave us a rating on the platform you are streaming from. We will be eternally grateful. If you are not doing so already, make sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn by typing in @JustShiftLeft all one word, for any updates and new episode releases. Finally, this podcast is fully supported by Permit.io, of which me and Or work at, so make sure you go ahead and check out Permit if you need a simple solution to implement authorization. That's all, and we will see you in the next episode.